Hello and welcome to the PPW Pod, bringing you news, views, and interviews from the real estate marketplace and PropTech world. Simon and Harvey are with me today. How are you doing, guys?
Very good,
Very
thank
well,
you, Ed.
thanks.
Great for the three of us to be here back again.
Yeah, today is all about interesting companies that we have seen. The idea of today's podcast is Harvey and I, in our kind of daily going through the news of the industry, sometimes we come across interesting companies with interesting models. We think we found two interesting companies. We're going to see if they're interesting. We're going to talk about them with Simon, see if he thinks they're interesting. It's a question I get quite a lot. You know, have you seen anything interesting? We're going to put it to the test. Okay, guys?
Sounds good to
Yep,
me.
sounds good.
I guess I'll kick us off. Simon, have you ever heard of Tsukuruba?
No.
Okay, I hadn't until very recently as well. Tsukuruba is, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, it is a Japanese company. And I initially thought on looking at their website that they were kind of a real startup that's just come through and is making a lot of noise. It turns out this is a company that dates back to 2011. So this is a company started in 2011 in Tokyo, literally just as a co-working office in Tokyo, right? 2012, they launched from their co-working office. They launched an interior design business. So far, so boring, right? Then in 2015, they launched what they're most known for now, which is called Cow Camo. So Cow Camo is an end-to-end brokerage business for used and renovated property. I'm actually going to share my screen now. We're going to have a look at it. So what Cow Camo does, as I understand it at least, is they will it's essentially, it looks like a real estate portal. So this is a listing. It looks like a real estate portal. If you go back to Cow Camo here, it looks like a real estate portal. However, there's some slight differences. You know, as you can see, search by area preference, typical real estate portal stuff. But the first thing I noticed about this company that was a little bit interesting were the listings. So this is a listing. So far, so normal, right? All pretty good. By the way, the translation into English is pretty good and seamless. If you scroll down, it kind of looks a little bit like the landing page or the detailed page of like an Idealista or something, where they have all the photos like this in a kind of vertical layout. But then you have these little commentaries from the portal itself. This apartment is in the blah, 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 right? And then, okay, another little commentary. I think these are done with AI. And then if you scroll down, I think, yeah, so this one's got the actual broker representing it, just giving a little bit of commentary, right? And you actually have at the top, so the person, Cow Camo has essentially kind of agents that look at these properties and will write a little brief description, right? You know, a mesmerizingly beautiful vintage apartment. I'm assuming this was written by a human being and not by AI. It might have been AI. But someone has actually gone through and viewed this property in the same way that, let's say, I think Spotter Home does in Europe, right? So that's one thing that was kind of interesting about this company. It's the kind of thing that got me started my investigation, let's say. So it's an end-to-end brokerage business for used and renovated property, right? It listed on the stock exchange in Tokyo in 2019. It's invested into a furniture subscription company. In 2020, it launched a personalized renovation service. And currently the market cap is 77 million. Any questions so far, right? We'll get on to why it's interesting in a second.
I'm with you so
no
far.
questions.
No,
It's
so
friendly.
far, so standard, right? We've seen companies do these things before. It kind of, some of these things make sense, right?
Yeah, I'm wondering what's unique apart from some randomly generated comments.
Yeah. So, okay, firstly, I think what's interesting about this company, well, I mean, obviously the background, you don't get too many, let's call them, you know, just someone who operates a co-working space that turns into a real estate portal, right? That's quite an interesting origin story, I would say, for a real estate portal. I also don't think this is a real estate portal we're talking about here. This is an end-to-end brokerage and design company. And why I think it's interesting and why I brought it up today is because of the kind of cultural change that's going on in Japan at the moment, that this company is hoping to kind of ride to big profit, right? So did you guys know that in Japan, pretty much all existing houses, so secondhand houses, get destroyed after about 25, 30 years.
No,
Yes.
I didn't.
I used to own a portal in Japan, so yes.
Okay, well, so Simon knows that. So I found that really interesting. Why do they get destroyed? So the second-hand housing market in Japan is it's known as, doing some research, is known as quote unquote the fourth option. So people just don't really buy used houses in Japan very much, except more and more people are choosing to buy these houses. And this is a company which is kind of trying to make sure that more people do follow that option, right? So the founders of this company actually wrote a book all about the cultural shift that's happening in Japan. Apparently, it's very interesting. Obviously, I haven't read it. I don't speak Japanese. So the Japanese housing market has gone from this kind of once in a lifetime purchase where people just buy one new build condo in their lives and that's it. And the idea is that people will start to purchase 3, 4, 5 times in their lifetime. And this company will come in and they will redesign, renovate these houses to the point where they don't need to be pulled down, destroyed every 25, 30 years, right? The other interesting thing about it is it's been going since 2011. It listed on the stock market in whatever it was, 2019, had never made a profit. And just the last 2 quarters, it has started making a profit in line with what I think it said it was going to do in its prospectus. Anybody impressed yet?
I think it's
Harvey's shaking his head. Simon's kind of shaking his head. Okay.
The question is this a niche business that happens to be at its core? It's a listing platform that has listings and it's making its money off the back end through transactions. Okay, there's many of those happening around the world. Okay? And the question is, are they doing anything unique that is replicable in other markets, or is what are they doing? Elements of it are unique because of just local market characteristics. Okay, and I think that's probably the second, not the first.
Harvey, come on, tell me it's interesting.
I certainly like the user-generated comments that go on the listings. I think that level.
I don't think they're user-generated. It's the broker has generated them, and the person who's walked around from CalCamo has generated them. And I think AI might be in there as well.
Okay. What I mean by user-generated, is like it's done by a person who's actually seen the property. And you're right. That's something that I was closely tied in with during my time at Spotter Home, where we'd have home checkers go check out the apartment. And one of the things that we worked on specifically during my time in the listings department was that we wanted the home checkers to start being a bit more transparent about what they were seeing inside properties, what was good about it and what was bad about it. To give you a brief bit of context, Spotter Home operates by having you not visit the property before you book it and move in. So having transparency and comments on the listings coming from the people that are viewing it in your stead is actually a significant part of whether someone is going to click book or not, right? And I think it's good to see that there are other businesses also doing this on their listings. I think having transparency in terms of good and bad about a listing, I think is only ever going to be a good thing in terms of the user experience and how someone is interacting with the listing before they make a buying decision or not.
But whose interest is it in apart from the user? It's not in anybody's interest apart from the user. Surely, if I'm a landlord, if I'm an agent, I don't want anything negative up there, right?
Therein lies the rub, Ed. Therein lies the rub, because what you have to do is, if you are going to be listing your property on a platform that sells itself off people not visiting the property beforehand, the question is whether having the negative connotations attached to your listing actually makes it seem more authentic and trustable. And therefore, by having it highlighted beforehand, I'm actually more likely to get a buying decision in my favor by simply saying, oh, by the way, there are a couple of cracks in the walls, or this fridge is going to be replaced in the near future, for example.
Okay, something just come to mind as a potential workaround here. Like, let's say you're a real estate portal. Let's say you want to start building this trust with the users. You want to start being honest about things. What could you do to maybe give an honest review, but not hurt your clients or your landlords or your agents at the same time. I think what I've seen done quite cleverly was we all know Homely in Australia. Homely is a challenger portal in Australia, which I think started out as a neighborhood guide, which was kind of like a forum where people would go on and leave their reviews for specific neighborhoods or even specific streets. Now, I read some of those back in the early days and they were quite good. People were quite honest. I remember one particular neighborhood in Adelaide, people were being very honest about like questions about, it's next to the sewage plant, does it stink? And everyone was like, yeah, it stinks. It stinks, but the housing's really cheap, right? So I don't know. I think that could be an avenue to explore for a real estate marketplace looking to build trust. I don't know, Simon, you seen anything similar to that?
I think building trust is a very interesting concept. And when we think about building trust, the most important thing is that what I see is real. Okay. So that's the first thing about building trust. There's layers. Okay. Having honest reviews on a listing about, this is, the back pipe smelly or whatever, doesn't build trust. Okay. Because not having the information there, just excluding it, doesn't destroy trust, because you don't know until you've physically been to the property. So making sure that the property is what it is for sale, it does look like it is, the photographs aren't materially fake. We all know that they're shot in the best light, and that the agent gets back to you in a timely manner, and that the price is what the price is. They're the core elements of trust. And that is why in some markets...
So there's no value, or there's limited value in having like a neighbor, user-generated content on either a listing or a neighborhood.
No. I think maybe for a neighborhood, but for an individual listing, we're not buying an iPad. We're not buying a new something, a cigarette lighter or something. It's something small and that you buy many of over time.
No, it's much more important than that. I would argue that because it's so much more important than that, I wouldn't mind. I would love to hear what previous tenants had to say about my, the various apartments that I've lived in over the years.
At the end of the day, when you're going to go to a bank, what you care most about is that the house is real, etc., and then the bank's going to give you the money. There are much higher order magnitude issues that you're going to worry about than what some random person you have no idea who is. How do you know who you are, right? Says, this is a great neighborhood to live in. Okay, was that the real estate agent? Was it the person selling the house? Was it someone who, how do you know? And the difference is, if I buy a new iPhone or a new whatever, and the user, and I'm not looking at 5 user reviews or 10 user reviews, I'm looking at 1,000 positive reviews. You're not going to get 1,000 reviews on a property. You might get half a dozen. Because why? Think about it logically, right? I'm interested in buying a property. I go and visit it. Am I going to leave a positive review about it and thus increase competition to buy the one item? If you're going to buy an iPhone, we can all simultaneously buy this same iPhone. One of us can buy the house. So no one in their right mind is going to increase competition by saying this is a great house. If anything, I'm going to write anonymously, oh my God, did you hear the noise next door? There's building construction across the road. Because you want to dissuade people from buying it.
Okay, I'm thinking more about rentals here. Perhaps I tell you, your point.
Same concept when you're in many
markets. The tenant who's moving out isn't motivated to give a good or a bad review. They'll probably give you an honest review.
No, they're probably not motivated to give you a review at all. Why would you bother? I mean, and in most markets for rentals are in such short supply, no one gives a shit. They just want to actually get the rental. Go to Australia at the moment, go to Melbourne at the moment, there's 10 requested tenants for every property. No one's sitting there going, well, let's read the review of this property before we decide, because by the time they've read the review, someone else has actually got the apartment.
Okay, Harvey, did they ever, at Spots at Home, did anyone ever talk about doing user-generated content around listings? Or about, like, neighborhoods or cities or anything like that?
Yeah, so we had a whole suite of neighborhood descriptions that were done based off pretty local knowledge. So those were actually pretty specialized. And then what we wanted to do was we wanted to get landlord reviews. So was the landlord, quick to answer questions? Did they keep your deposit after you left the property, for example, like that. So we wanted landlord reviews from tenants, but we didn't necessarily want property reviews from tenants. We kept the property reviews to the home checker's initial visitation when we were listing the property in the first instance.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Before we move on, Simon, you said you owned a real estate portal in Japan. Having
I
read
invested
about
in
this
one, yes.
company now, it seems very interesting to me because before we researched this company, I didn't know anything about the Japanese market. How was it owning a real estate portal in Japan, and just how different is the market in Japan to everywhere else?
Fundamentally different. Basically, 100% of buyers are local because it's very hard for foreigners to buy in the market. It's an MLS system, so there's a lot of multi-listing. In the days where we owned it, they still had MLS books, the big, thick books that they would publish once a week with all the listings in them. So it's sort of like the US market, but closed. It's not closed on purpose. It just happens to be closed because everything's done in Japanese. It's just it's very hard for a foreigner to buy property there and so on. Very hard to make these businesses work. You have an aging population. You have that doesn't make them more internet savvy. Okay, it just makes them aging over time. So it just was a hard market to operate in, and I eventually exited the investment because it was never going to be as attractive as other markets, which had a growing population. So that younger generation coming through who are now in their 20s and 30s and 40s, who are internet natives.
Okay,
very traditional, and it's a very traditional market. So you're sort of born, live, and die in one area and one region. So there was less movement between regions. So it was just much harder to run the business.
Okay. I don't know, maybe this is one for off camera, but what was the name of the portal and what happened there? Why did you get into it in the first place?
We ended up closing it down. It was honestly, I don't remember the name now. This was back in 2000, about at least 10, 12 years ago. Got 30 current investments, and I've had a whole bunch of others over time. But we ended up closing it down. It was run by two guys. The two guys had a falling out. They were two foreigners who'd lived in Japan for 25 years each. They had a falling out over that time, so that became problematic. One bought out the other, then bought me out, and then merged it with another business he had and sold it all off to someone else.
One quick question, Simon. One quick question, which is,
running businesses is hard work. In any
if
market.
If you have three owners from like three expat owners, like three operator or investors in the business, and none of them are from that market. So it seemed like you were implying that the three investors, you and these two other guys, none of whom were Japanese. Does that make it infinitely more difficult to make the business work, in your opinion?
I think if although there were two major shareholders and about four of us minor shareholders in that process. The two major shareholders fluent in Japanese, or married to locals, have kids, lived in Japan, absolutely fluent. Knew their way around, worked in real estate there, so they had a lot of inbuilt knowledge and understanding about the market over a long period of time. The difficulties in any business, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world, is if you have two founders and you're reliant on them when they're growing the business and they have a falling out, you're a passenger on the outcome. Right? And we, as the small group of other investors, were passengers in that process. And we did, and fundamentally, if you look at a portfolio approach, there was no point in getting in the middle of someone else's fight. None. So that's why he said, "Well, get me out of here."
Okay, I'm sure. I think I have more questions that I'll ask off camera. Harvey, why don't you switch us up? What company have you got that you think is under the radar that you think Simon and I are going to be impressed by?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've gone from Japan and now we're taking a flight over to Russia, to a small and kind of state-owned portal by the name of DomClick. So for those of you who don't understand the Russian market, there are three massive, massive businesses that you need to know about. The first two are generalized classified marketplaces where you can buy anything from phones to cars to whatever. They're called Yandex and Avito. So they're very popular places to go for people buying anything in Russia. And then we have a major real estate portal called Cian, which is profitable. It makes good money, and it has a hell of a lot of I think I've got some stats here actually that, yeah, I mean billions of views every month on its website. But then we have this tiny portal called DomClick, right? It's owned by a bank called Sberbank. It's the largest and a state-owned bank in Russia. And it's interesting that you should mention this episode in terms of companies that operate under the radar, but are maybe interesting, because DomClick is a distant challenger, but it's actually been very, very active in 2024, specifically in terms of the products and the services that it has been launching. I've counted around a dozen since January. So this is a very busy, very active business at the moment. And that sort of brings us up to speed. So anything interesting so far?
I've two questions so far. You said that there's competition that's state owned. Surely, if this real estate portal is owned by a bank, surely pretty much everything in Russia is state owned, right? Like either explicitly or implicitly. Almost, I know why Simon's shaking his head, but pretty much everything's state owned or state controlled to an extent, right? And my second question would be: you said that DomClick have released like 10 product updates or whatever. I'm pretty sure most portals do 10 updates every 6 months or whatever. Isn't it just the case that this is a company talking about what they're doing and releasing press releases instead of just keeping it internal?
I don't know. It's a good point. Maybe there are a lot of businesses that are being just as active as DomClick, but I think what I like about what they've been doing is that because they're tied so closely to this Russian state-owned bank, is that a lot of the services and products that they have released in the last few months have been very much on like the financial side of the transaction. And I thought it would be interesting to maybe share a couple of them in case a couple of our listeners want to maybe steal some ideas from what they've been doing.
Okay, so give us a couple of product updates. What's some interesting ones that have been happening?
Yeah, sure. So first one in January, DomClick Pro comes out. It's a subscription service for agents. Interestingly, because again we're tied to the bank, you get your listings vetted faster, but you also get a tie-in offer for a 0.3% discount on your mortgage if you're signing up and driving leads via DomClick. We have also in January a rental service for landlords. I'll give you figures in USD to make things easier. $17 gets you a tenant finding service and an online rental payment feature. So not big bucks, but a nice to have if you want to, have someone come into your property without you having to do too much of the donkey work yourself. Remote mortgages via e-signatures, home moving service launched, online booking for property viewings. Interestingly, in April, green mortgages. Any energy efficient properties qualify for a further 0.3% discount on mortgages for the entire term of the loan, which I thought was a nice little initiative to launch. And also, remember, this is all in the same business. In the same month, April, transferable mortgages. So DomClick now allows you to inherit the previous mortgage from the previous owner, so you don't get punished by, say, an interest rate hike that has coming since the last time the property was purchased. And the cost of this service maxes out at the equivalent of 321 USD. Also in April, you can appoint a mortgage representative. So this is interesting. Buyers can appoint a representative of their choosing to find, negotiate, and even sign off payments for mortgages. And they don't need to be a lawyer. So you can just have your friend or your family just do it for you, basically. And I like the fact that this is a user-friendly service, right? It's something that says, I'm too scared of doing this all on my own. I'll get my father who's done this before to do it for me.
Okay, thanks for that. Simon, another market you know all about, I'm sure, the Russian market. A real estate portal owned and operated by a state-run bank. Isn't that a bit of an unfair advantage? It seems like it might be.
No. If you actually look at the Russian market and what's happening, it's really a two-horse race between Cian and Avito. They're the two that are the ones who materially have the eyeballs, lead generation, and so on. Because they're just very well executed. And if you sort of get below the covers about where they're dominant, Cian is the dominant player in Moscow and the Greater Moscow region, St. Petersburg. Then as you move away from there, Avito gets stronger in its operations. That's really where the competitive game is in that market. And they're both very good players. I think Cian is a very, very good team, very focused, and for a very long time has been run incredibly well by Maxime and his team.
Okay, fair enough. Answered with a straight bat. Let's talk a bit more broadly about banks owning real estate portals. So DomClick is one example in Russia. I think there's another one in Hungary. I've seen others elsewhere. I don't know that I'm trying to think of any kind of leading real estate portals around the world that are owned by banks. I can't think of too many, but it actually kind of makes sense to me a little bit, right? Because the biggest question when you're looking at a home is, can I afford this home? And one of the biggest kind of problems for mortgage lenders like banks is lead generation. Does it make sense for more banks to, I wouldn't say build real estate portals, but perhaps invest in or even buy real estate portals?
No, 0 sense. Now, first of all, you've got to understand, take the Russian Sberbank has more than 50% of all mortgages in Russia go through Sberbank. Okay, so having a company like DomClick as a lead generation, it's just one of many lead generation sources for them. And therefore, the efforts go into converting people on the site to being leads for mortgages. However, that doesn't always satisfy the requirements of the advertiser, who is, at the end of the day, interested in selling a home, not generating a mortgage. The real estate agent does not get paid for every mortgage. The real estate agent gets paid for every home sold. So there is a disconnect between the motives of the various parties. And that's why you've seen many property portals around the world try to get into mortgages over the years. REA has done it 3 times. Okay, they did once when I was there back in 2006, called REA Home Loans. Did it again maybe a decade later, called REA Home Loans. Closed it down, and then did a 3rd time where they bought an existing mortgage broker. Okay, so, and the question then you say is, well, can it make a material difference to my revenues? Okay, then you've got to look at the underlying economics of mortgages. Now, mortgages, you make money on basically the spread in the cost of the interest rate paid by the consumer, and you take part of that profit and the interest rate paid out the back end by the processing facility. Okay, and you make it, and the problem is you've got to sell a hell of a lot of mortgages to get a big number to make a difference.
All right. Harvey, by the way, having looked at these companies before, so whenever we've done our big studies where we've looked through all the real estate portals in the world and said, whether they have X, Y, or Z feature, I do specifically remember looking at the Russian real estate portals and thinking, these are actually really good. I wasn't expecting them to be good, to have all these features, but they do have a lot of features. My question then to you, Simon, is why? So if it doesn't make sense really for a bank to own a real estate portal because interests aren't aligned or whatever, and if Sberbank do own this real estate portal and they clearly are investing a lot of money in it, as Harvey said, there's like 10 product updates in the last 6 months or whatever. Why? What's the point?
Well, a lot of money is always relative, correct? If you've got 135 million people in a market and you're writing 50% of all the mortgages in that market, you're clearly not making 10 or 20 million revenue. You're making billions of revenue. So if you then decide we are going to have a lead generation source attached to us, where we'll get the listings, we're not going to even charge for listings or charge a very low amount of money for the listings to be on the site. We'll generate traffic, but we're going to make all our money by just feeding into our mortgage broking business. And we're going to spend 10 million out of billions. It's a rounding error at the end of the day. Okay? So everything is relative in that game. If you're the REA group and you've got $1 billion in revenue and you choose to spend 5 million on something, you're not going to notice it's not going to make a big difference either way. But if it happens just to feed in, reduce your cost of acquisition of a customer, or continue to solidify yourself as the market leader, then you do it. But it's not going to fundamentally change the outcome. So in these two cases, REA is a listings portal. That's where it makes 80% of its revenue. And the other 20% is all these other things added up. Sberbank makes 80, 90%, 100% of its revenue through all the banking stuff. And it might make 1 or 2% of its revenue on a portal. So it's not, they're just playing different games. So that's why and so they're going to have to release a whole bunch of features and functions that service the mortgage market, make it easier for you to transfer mortgages, remortgage, whatever, etc. If you're a property portal, you're worried about launching a product that gets you to the top of the search or makes your ad bigger so that I can charge you an extra 20% that goes straight to my bottom line. Different games, just different games are being played. So that's why I think it's interesting. DomClick is interesting, but it's interesting, but it's not a competitor that's taking away traffic, eyeballs, leads, or revenue from the other pure portal players in the Cians of the world or Avito or wherever.
Okay, well, we have failed to impress Simon with our two companies. I'll be honest with you, I thought that was going to be the case. Simon, why don't you try and impress us? You pretty much at this point famously say that you get whatever it is, 3 pitches at you every day or every week or whatever it is. You must see hundreds of different business models, different ideas in and around real estate marketplaces and prop tech. Is there anything you can think of top of your head that you go, actually, that's really interesting? Have a look at it.
Anything that I would say was unique, interesting, and different. Right? Because
if it's that interesting, unique, and different, you're probably wanting to invest in it and not tell everybody about it. Anything on the second tier of interesting?
No, I think the things that are interesting are those, the characteristics of a company are those that have already reached scale, that are trying to carve a new niche, trying to do things that we currently do, but do them better. I think, we interviewed Stefan from PropTex the other day. I think that is interesting of what he's doing. Is it going to be interesting in 12 months' time or 24 months' time? Probably not, because the rest of the market will have caught up to a lot of what he's doing. What makes it interesting is he's a first mover doing something with AI and so on. I think the ones that are super interesting are those that have cracked the code and are doing the boring stuff really well. And it's counterintuitive, but if you've cracked the code on how to sell real estate at a 30% higher margin than a traditional real estate agency, that's interesting to me. Why? Because you are using technology to take a current system and process and make it better. And if you can do that day in, day out with a 1 to 2% improvement every month, that to me is interesting.
Any examples that are doing 30, 40% better than regular real estate agents?
Yeah, you take something like what Fuzzwaz is doing in Thailand in terms of so that's part of Lifel Connect. So you've got all parts of the value chain. You've got vertical search, driving traffic to a portal in .property, which is then driving traffic at the listing level to listings owned by Fuzzwaz. And they're converting it with their sales team. And they're fundamentally doing it a little bit better. And that gap is growing, right? So the traditional players tend to have pretty flat models because they've been doing it for 40, 50 years. Right? And then the new guys are incrementally improving. So they're moving away over time, trying to create a bigger and bigger gap at the contribution margin level. What it really means is that they can sell more properties faster at a lower cost of doing it. And thus they make a higher contribution margin. And that to me is what's really interesting out there. But for many people, that's boring because many people have, the attention spans of a newt, right? They're just going, I want this instant, give me this instant gratification. But no, the ones who I think are the real businesses of the future are the ones who are willing to do the hard yards for many years. And if I go back to the early days of REA, we spent 4 years being really bored. And all we did was have 1 or 2 packages, and we knocked on every single door of every single Australian real estate agency and said, buy my package. And then we just said, how do we put them on the website? How do we make them just a little bit prettier every single time? And how do we improve the click-through rate so we get a 1 to 2 to 3% improvement in the number of leads for every eyeball that comes to the site? Most people find that boring. It's repetitive, it's A/B testing, and it's not sexy. But it creates a hell of a lot of value over time.
Okay, that is so the headline from all of this is actually the interesting companies are the ones doing what's always been done, but doing
boring,
it
but great.
Boring but interesting. Okay, all right. Guys, I think we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much, as always, to both of you, and we'll see everybody again next week.
Okay. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys.